All right, guys, this video is all about making you from a good bartender into a great bartender. I'm gonna teach you that secret, that one little nugget you're missing in understanding some of the issues you may be having making drinks at your bar or making drinks at home. Some of the signs that you may be struggling with this little secret I'm about to tell you are that when you go from bar job to bar job, maybe you're a professional bartender, but you have two jobs and they have different products in the rail, you're making the same drinks and they come out different. And you're like, what's going on? Or maybe you've noticed a regular who comes in and orders a specific alcohol off the back bar and you struggle to make that drink with the call spirit the same way you do with your rail spirit. Or maybe you've noticed you make the same cocktail but with a different spirit and you're noticing vast differences in the taste of the cocktail, which shouldn't really exist. You're like, the balance is off. Maybe it's too hot, or maybe it's too sweet when you use like a gin versus a bourbon. And you're like, why? It's the same recipe. It should taste the same across the spirits, just with bourbon instead of gin, or just with gin instead of bourbon. It should mostly taste the same and there should be some similar balance, and you're not finding it. Well, here's the reason, guys. It all comes down to ABV, alcohol by volume. Now, as we get into this, I have to start with what the essence of a cocktail is. So let's go back to when cocktails first started. Cocktails first started with the miller in town taking your grain, turning it into booze, which he wasn't very good at, so that it could be preserved. And when the miller did that, he was really good at grinding grain. He wasn't so good at making booze. So your booze would come out harsh, usually high proof. So when you got that booze, you had to tame it and balance it with other things in order to make it palatable. So the cocktail, at its very core, is a way to make bad things taste balanced and better. Back then and today, the essence of a cocktail is balance. Now, what are we balancing? There's typically 6 things we consider when we talk about balance. The first, if it's a shaken cocktail, is citrus. Not all cocktails are shaken, but if you're gonna add citrus to something, it must be balanced by sugar. But if you don't have citrus, you still need probably sugar in some form or another. That needs to also be balanced. And then we have booze, which obviously is in every cocktail. We have water, which is added either by an ice cube or by the shake. We have bitterness, which could come from something as simple as bitters, like Angostura, which really works more like a melting ingredient. Or it could be something harshly bitter, almost like Campari, or even an Amaro, or even a vermouth, which has bitterness from various ingredients that are added to it. And then you have temperature. And the colder something is, think of it like a keyhole. You're taking all of the various flavors in this harsh booze and harsh ingredients, and you're kind of shrinking them down into a flavorable still, but controlled substance that can be consumed with pleasure as opposed to harshness.
Mr. Burns, I'm afraid you are the sickest man in the United States. You have everything.
You mean I have pneumonia?
Yes.
Juvenile diabetes?
Yes.
Hysterical pregnancy?
A little bit, yes.
Well, this sounds like bad news.
Well, you'd think so, but all of your diseases are in perfect balance. If you have a moment, I can explain.
Well,
Here's the door to your body, you see? And these are oversized novelty germs. Here's what happens when they all try to get through the door at once. Move it, shout ahead. We call it Three Stooges syndrome.
so what you're saying is I am indestructible.
Oh, no. In fact, even a slight breeze could...
Indestructible.
And when you get the right balance of these 6 things, what you end up with is a pleasurable cocktail that's greater than the sum of its parts. We call that synergy. And many cocktails are well known for creating that synergy. Think of the mojito, which is lime, rum, sugar, and mint. But if you put those things together in the perfect proportion, perfectly balanced with crushed ice and water, what you get is something that blows your hair back. Hence, I have no hair. That's called a mojito. It tastes something wholly greater than the sum of its parts. Or take the daiquiri, only 3 ingredients, rum, lime, and sugar, but made right with the right texture, the right ice, the right amount of water, and all these things balanced just perfectly. You get something that blows your mind. So that's what we mean by balance. So let's start with your specs. We're making a citrus cocktail. The way we figured out balance when it comes to citrus cocktails is we have hard specs. We don't really change them a whole lot. We just play Mr. Potato Head with them. And if you need a video, I'll link one up here that'll help you understand how specs are kind of hardened. They're the same across the board. And so we took care of balance very early on with balancing citrus and sugar. Those have to be in line, and what you'll generally find is that we balance lemon juice with simple syrup the same way across the board. We balance lemon and honey the same way across the board. The same with lime juice and simple syrup across the board. And the same with lime and honey syrup across the board. And we found that those tend to balance each other. Even if you just tasted them by themselves, you'd be like, oh, that's not too sweet, not too sour. Take that part of the balance equation out of it. It's very important, but if you want to see that, please check out the videos that I've linked above, and you can get a bigger idea of how specs can create consistency in your cocktails. But probably the most underappreciated and important way to balance a cocktail is between the alcohol and the water. Because once we balance the weak portion, or the citrus and sugar, we really need to balance the hard portion, the strong portion, the stuff that has booze in it. And how do we take the Miller's harsh booze and make it palatable? Well, that has to do with ABV. Because what is alcohol by volume? But how much alcohol percentage makes up your total cocktail? And what we found is that per style of drinks, we fall in a certain range. And that range happens to be, for shaken up drinks, for instance, like a daiquiri, it happens to be between 17.5 and 22.5 alcohol by volume once the drink is completely shaken and done. And so in order to get a drink as cold as possible, we want it as watered down as possible without the water making the drink too watery to the guest. And so where did we come up with this 17.5% to 22.5% for shaken up cocktails? Well, we came up with it by tasting a lot of drinks.
I'm getting drunk.
And what we found is that guests who drank 17% cocktails, they were like, nope, can't do it. It's too watered down. Okay, fine. And then we gave them drinks that were at 23%, and they would be like, ooh, too boozy, not cold enough. Like, they had complaints. There wasn't enough water to balance the booze. And so what we found is this sweet spot. If you made a drink between 17.5 and 22.5 roughly that was shaken up, the guests would enjoy it enough that it could be served to them, and you could charge them without feeling guilty about charging them for something that's not delicious. Then the question becomes, all right, well, if I shake, let's say, to 18%, because we don't want to go over into the past 17.5 and get too watery. Let's just say we shake right around that 18% number. Oh, how much water should we shake into a cocktail? Well, it's completely dependent on what booze you're using. And this is the secret, guys. This is the secret. You have to use a consistent ABV on your booze in order to consistently shake the same amount of water into your cocktails and create a consistency across the board. Now, at Here and After Cocktail Tavern and places I've run and worked at before, our goal was to get booze between 86 and 90 in our cocktail rail. And the reason is pretty simple. That would give us and our bartenders a consistent range to shake the drink and add a certain amount of water every single time and get the same result. But you couldn't prevent an occasional guest from ordering something in the higher proof range. So maybe they order 100 proof gin, or they order 100 proof bourbon, or 100 proof Applejack Laird's. When they would order these higher booze cocktails, we'd have to shake a lot longer. But we'd only know that because we understood that the ABV was higher with our starting product. So just to give you an example of the vast difference between booze, let's just take a couple different gins. And let's say we're making, I don't know, a bee's knees. So a bee's knees is a classic cocktail with just 3 ingredients: lemon, honey, and gin. And you'd think those ingredients, being as simple as they are and as few as they are, would be easy to make the exact same way every time. But the real answer is, it depends. And it depends on what you're using for gin. If you were to use something like Aristocrat gin in your rail, like mini bars do, because it's cheaper, let's be honest, it's watered down. If you added 1.25 ounces of water, which is really a pretty standard amount if you want to get the drink cold, you would be at 16.8% alcohol by volume in the finished cocktail. Problem with that is it's out of our range. Remember, 17.5 is as much water as your drink can take before guests will think it's watered down. So that means you either have to shake less water and make a warmer cocktail, or you're serving a cocktail outside of the range and it's just watered down. But then let's say you use 88 proof gin, something we would think falls right in our range, our 86 to 90 proof range for our well. Beefeater falls at 88 proof, and when you shake about 1.25 ounces of water into it, you fall about 18.5%. That makes a great cocktail. It's cold enough because it's closer to 17.5 than it is 22.5, but it also falls in that range where we can serve the cocktail and be happy to give the guest the drink. But then let's say the guest calls for Bombay Sapphire. Well, Bombay Sapphire is another London dry gin, so it's the same thing, right? Not even close. 94.6 or at least 94 proof is actually the ABV that classic London dry gins were served at. And if you have a drink that high proof, what you get is something closer to 20% alcohol by volume in the finished product, if you add 1.25 ounces of water with the shake, like all of the other drinks. The problem is that that's going to be a touch warmer, and that's also going to be in the range. It's certainly delicious, but you'll notice one thing: the higher the alcohol, the quicker the froth dies. You don't have the texture that you can get from using a slightly lower ABV like Beefeater. And so when we started this clip, this had bubbles, they went away quickly. Whereas the 88 proof, it'll stick around a little longer and you get that texture. And so there are vast differences between using an 80 proof Aristocrat gin, which we wouldn't even consider it here and after, to using an 88 proof in our perfect range of 86 to 90, or using a 94 proof gin, like in that classic ABV London dry gin range. I know what it's like to be a busy bartender, and I know that none of you are doing these calculations on the fly. The point isn't for you to be figuring out ABVs in your finished cocktails on the fly in your shift. The point is, you should know that if you use a higher ABV product like Bombay Sapphire, you need to shake it longer and a little harder in order to get the same froth and the same ABV range for balance. Same goes for Beefeater. If you use 88 proof something, you're gonna need to shake that a little longer than maybe your 86 proof Evan Williams bourbon that you're using for cocktails that are shaken with bourbon. When you start to understand that a couple points in ABV makes a little bit of a difference, and you shake longer or shorter based on those ABV differences, you'll become a better bartender. And that is the super deep secret that if you master, you will become the best of the best as opposed to just a great bartender. That's the difference. And when someone calls a high proof spirit off the back bar that's 100 proof, get your shaking pants on, because you're gonna shake a while to get that into that 17.5, 22.5 range for a shaken up cocktail. To get the froth you need and texture you need in order to make that a truly great drink. Because higher ABV limits the amount of froth on your drinks. And that about sums it up, guys. If you want to be the best bartender you can be, you have to consider ABV in your finished product. If you want to make a cocktail the best it can be made, as balanced it can be made, you need to be hitting the same ABV ranges, particularly on cocktails that are shaken up. So, if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Give me a little shout out in the comments if you guys have some reason to disagree with me, or if you guys think that there are other great secrets I should do a video on, give me a recommendation. And as always, guys, I really appreciate your support. We're still growing as a channel. Anytime you can send this to a friend, any nerdy bartender out there who really wants to go from a good bartender to the best of the best, give them the secret and they'll start to learn how to be the best. And as always, guys, to better drinks, cheers. See you soon.